Hello, this week's Parsha is Parshat Shemot. It's the beginning of the new book of Shemot, which means in English, it's called Exodus, or also called Sefer HaGeulah, the book of redemption, because it tells about the slavery in Egypt, but then about the incredible Geulah, the incredible redemption from the slavery, which led to the Jewish people receiving the Torah and ultimately going to Eretz Yisrael. So the Parsha begins, Ve'ele Shemot B'nai Yisrael Habaim Mitzrayma, and these are the names of the children of Israel who came down to Mitzrayim. And it lists all the names of the tribes. And then later it tells us, Vayamat Yosef v'chol echav v'chol hador hahu. And Yosef died, and so did all of his brothers and all of that generation. Uvenei Yisrael paru v'yishretzu v'yirbu v'yatzmu b'me'od me'od v'timale ha'aretz otam. And the children of Israel, they were fruitful and they increased greatly. They multiplied and they became very powerful, and the whole land was filled with them. Vayakam melech chadash al Mitzrayim asher lo yada et Yosef. And there rose up a new king in Egypt that did not know Yosef. So this is a very interesting beginning to this new book. So what we have here is we have a situation where Yaakov and all of his sons came down from the land of Eretz Yisrael. So they had all lived in Eretz Yisrael, and they came down to live in Egypt. And they knew what life in Eretz Yisrael was like. And in Eretz Yisrael, it was very, very clear and revealed that Hashem existed and that Hashem blessed them and that all the blessings came from Hashem. So they had come down into Egypt and they kept that same mentality, but now there lived a generation of people who had never lived in Eretz Yisrael. They only knew life in Egypt. These were the Jews that only knew life in Egypt. And so it says that there was a new king that did not know Yosef. So the sages say, was it really a new king, or was it just the same old king that now he acted as if he'd never even heard of Yosef, now that Yosef had died? So we know that while Yosef was alive, Yosef was very, very revered and respected. And when he brought his father and his brothers down to Egypt, they were also very revered and very respected in the land of Egypt. But now, with this new generation, with none of the old generation left, well, now the children, they had no connection to Eretz Yisrael. So it wasn't only that the king had a lowered respect, but also the people themselves had a lower respect for that connection to the land of Israel and to everything that that represented in terms of belief in Hashem. So this new king saw that the Jewish people were becoming very, very numerous and the land was filled with them. And he said, what will happen if an army from an outside country comes and invades our country? Well, these Jews, they may join up with that army, and they're so numerous, they'll be able to overthrow our government. We have to do something about it. So he came up with a plan to enslave the Jews, and that's what he did. First, they called them to do what's called national service, to come and help build new storage and treasure cities for Paro. But this national service soon turned into complete slavery, where the Jews were completely enslaved and they had no choice but to do what Paro said. They were controlled by taskmasters and whips and military that kept them in their places. So even with all that, the Jews continued to become more and more numerous, and Pharaoh's astrologers, his wise men who would look at the stars, they said, we see in the stars that soon will be born a young boy who is going to become the redeemer of these Jewish people and take them out of this slavery. So Paro was very upset, and he said, what? No, we have to kill every newborn boy. So at first he enlisted the midwives, who were called Shifra and Pua, but their real names were Yocheved and Miriam. And this was the mother and the sister of Moshe Rabbeinu, who was not yet born. And he said, you're the midwives. When the woman gives birth, before she even knows what she had, if you see it's a boy, just strangle him and tell the mother that the boy died, that he was born stillborn. He wasn't even born alive. So of course, Yocheved and Miriam, Shifra and Pua, did not cooperate with Paro, and they were very brave, and they did not do what he said. And so now Paro's astrologers came up with a more exact prophecy, and they said, this Redeemer of the Jewish people, his downfall, he will be judged by water. So they said, you should throw the boys and drown them in the Nile. So Paro came out with a new decree, and he said, Vayitzav Paro lechol amo, lemor kol haben hayilud, hayaora tashlichuhu, vechol habat techayun. So Paro came out and commanded to all of his people, saying that every Jewish boy, every boy that is born, you should throw him into the Nile River, but every girl, you can let her live. So as a result of this decree, the leader of the Jewish people at the time was a man named Amram, and he was from the tribe of Levi. And the tribe of Levi had always said they cannot go out to do this work for the national service because they are busy praying and learning Torah. And in Egypt, they respected that each group could have their holy people, so they didn't force the tribe of Levi to join the work, and therefore they were never enslaved as well, but they were still connected with the rest of the Jewish people, and Amram was the leader. And when he heard this terrible decree, he said, I'm going to separate from my wife. I don't want to have any more children if my boys are going to be thrown right into the Nile to die. No. And he told all the other Jewish men to separate from their wives. No babies are going to be born. This is not good. So his daughter Miriam came to him and said, Father, you're worse than Paro. You're more cruel. And he said, Miriam, what are you talking about? She said, Paro only decreed against the boys, but you're decreeing against the girls too. You're not letting anyone be born. Father, you need to have faith in Hashem. And her father took to heart what she said, and he went back to his wife. And very soon she became pregnant, and she gave birth to a baby boy after 6 months. So it was a short pregnancy, and a little baby boy was born. This baby would become Moshe Rabbeinu. And he filled the house with light, and they say he was born circumcised. He was this very special child. But after 3 months, she knew that she couldn't hide him any longer because they were watching her. She would go out with a pillow basically under her clothes to make it look like she's still pregnant. But after 9 months, the jig was going to be up. Your pregnancy can't last for very long. So at that point, she took a basket and she coated it with clay and with tar, and she put little Moshe in it, and she took it down to the Nile River. Okay, and it says, Vatasem basuf al sfat hayor. She took the baby in the basket, and she put it in the marsh, in the reeds around the river. It said al sfat hayor, at the edge of the river. And his sister Miriam, she kind of put herself there and waited to see what would happen. So just at that moment that this is, they're putting the baby Moshe there at the river, the daughter of Paro, Batya, she comes down to the river to bathe. And then she finds this basket and she pulls Moshe Rabbeinu out and she says, I'm going to adopt him as my son. And she calls him Moshe because she says, she called him Moshe. Let's see. Vatomer ki min hamaim mishisuhu, mishitihu. She called him Moshe ki min hamaim, from the water, mishitihu, like Moshe. I drew him out. That's why she called him Moshe. So our sages give us more background about this particular story, that Yocheved, when she brought her son in the basket to put him into the river, so it says she put him al sfat hayor, at the edge of the river. It doesn't say she put him into the river. And the reason she didn't want to put him in the river, tell our sages, is that this river was the Nile River. And the Nile River was the god, the Avodah Zarah of the Egyptian people. So why was it there Avodah Zarah? Because in Egypt, it doesn't rain much. If they would rely on rain, nothing would grow. What happens in Egypt is that the Nile River at a certain time of the year becomes full and overflows the banks of the river, and the water spreads out and waters the fields. And they would make little canals that when this would happen, the water would flow through those aqueducts and canals and spread out to water the entire land. And it was a very, very fertile land. That water really nourished the soil there, and a lot of things grew. It was very, very powerful. So the water did not come from the rain in Egypt. Rather, it came from the Nile. Now the Nile, where did it get the water? Because in the mountains in Africa, which Egypt is part of the continent of Africa, the high mountains, there would be snow, and that snowpack would then melt, and the melting snow, the water would run down and go into the river and cause the river to overflow. So the people in Egypt didn't see rain. They would see the river overflow. Now this is very different from a place where you see rain. When you see rain, then you look up into heaven and you want Hashem to make it rain. And you're looking and you're expecting, you're praying to Hashem. You realize that rain comes from above, from Shemaim, from Hashem. That it's Hashem's blessing that brings the rain. But when you're looking down at the river and you're focusing on the earth and looking down, you're not looking up. So the Egyptian mentality was that everything is controlled by nature. It's not from heaven, it's from nature. And that when the river would overflow, it would bring them all of their parnasa, it would bring them all of their sustenance. And they see that all of their sustenance comes from nature. So when a person lives in a place where it rains, so the farmer knows that he can plant all day and all night, but if the rain doesn't come, nothing's going to grow. Now with the Egyptians, they saw that nothing's coming from above. If they plant and they do their thing, well, the Nile is going to overflow. That's just part of how it works. And if I plant more, I'm going to have more. So it's my efforts and my work and my diligence. That's what makes me succeed. It's all about me and it's about nature. It's nothing to do with any kind of blessing. So that was the mentality of Egypt. So when Paro said, Kol haben hayilud Kol haben hayilud hayaora tashlihuhu. Every boy that is born, send him into the Nile River. What he meant, says the Rebbe, is that this is what he wants the Jewish mentality to be. These are children who grew up in Egypt. They have never been to Eretz Yisrael. They don't know what rain is about. They don't know what blessing from Hashem is about. Let's get them with the program that they should know that it's all about nature. It's all about my work and my effort. Let's throw him into our Avodah Zarah, that this is what we worship, okay? And whatever I have to do to succeed, I can do it. It's all okay. There's no limitations. There's no one watching from above to see if I've done things honestly or if I did things dishonestly, if I hurt another person. That doesn't matter. The important thing is that I should win. This is the Egyptian mentality. This is the mentality of having the Nile as your Avodah Zarah. Everything is about nature and not about right and wrong and blessing from Hashem. So when Batya, the daughter of Paro, came down to the river, so our sages tell us that she wanted to convert, that she was done with the idol worship of Egypt, that she saw that it was not the truth, it was not the right way, and that she had been influenced by the Jews who were slaves at that time with their ideas of a one God, and she wanted to become part of this religion and this service of one God. So she went into the water to be like immersing into a mikvah, to convert and to wash away from her all of the gods and all of the idol worship that had been part of her upbringing. And in her doing so, she invalidated, she nullified that river, the Nile, as Avodah Zarah. She purified it by immersing to get rid of the Avodah Zarah. And as she did so, it caused the little basket of Moshe, maybe some water went up onto the Svat Hayam, to the edge of the water, and brought it into the water, and now the basket was in the water. So now this little basket with Moshe is in the water. Now, the moment that that basket went into the water, then the astrologers of Paro came to him and said, he's in. The Redeemer of the Jews has just been thrown into the water. It's over. He's been drowned. We can cancel the decree. It's all good. And it was at that moment that the decree was nullified. And then Batya found this basket with the baby, and she took the baby and she said, I want to adopt this baby as my own baby. And she called him Moshe. So Moshe Rabbeinu then would grow up to be that Redeemer. Now Moshe is called the Raya Mehemna. Okay, so we're going to see how Moshe was the Redeemer from this mentality of it's all about me and my efforts and my power and my strength that make me a success. Moshe was going to restore to them their faith in God's blessing and in serving Hashem as the right way to live your life. So Moshe was called a Raya Mehemna. Moshe was called a faithful shepherd. That's Aramaic. Raya is a shepherd, and Mahemna is faithful. So the Rebbe tells us that really this is related to a verse in Tehillim. It's in Perek Lamed Zayin 37, verse 3, verse Gimel. B'tach b'Hashem, trust in Hashem, ba'asei tov, and do good. Shchan eretz, dwell in the land, ure'ei emunah, and be shepherded by emunah, by faith. Re'eh, when I say shepherded because it's that same word like ro'eh with an ayin, which means to shepherd. But really, a shepherd, what do? They care for you. They nourish you. They nourish the sheep, right? That's what they do. So re'eh emunah means be shepherded, nourish yourself through your emunah, through your faith. That this is what Moshe Rabbeinu would do for the Jewish people. He would nourish their faith so that they would be nourished by their faith. As the shepherd, he would instill in them this emunah that would cause them to be nourished by that emunah, by that faith. And when you're nourished by the emunah, it's not just something where you say, oh yeah, I believe in God, but it doesn't influence your life. It's something where you're nourished by it, where it influences your life, that you live your life differently because you have emunah. And this is what Moshe Rabbeinu would do. Now we know that Moshe Rabbeinu, his first job as a shepherd was shepherding the flocks of Yisro, his father-in-law. And Yisro is called Kohen Midian. He's called the priest of Midian. He was the ultimate priest of every avodah zarah, every idol worship that existed at the time. And yet Moshe Rabbeinu was able to take those sheep, okay, of this idol worshiping priest, and he could find the spark of holiness in the sheep, and he could nourish the spark of holiness and bring out that spark of holiness in the sheep. And this was his practice, that this is why Hashem chose him to be the shepherd of the Jewish people, because he would then go and he would nourish the spark of godliness, that pinta yid in every Jew, to inflame and bring out that emunah, that faith, that would then cause them to live their lives, not with the mentality of Egypt, but with the mentality of Eretz Yisrael, the mentality that you see that the rain falls. So the forefathers, Yaakov and his sons, when they were in Eretz Yisrael, they would see Hashem's presence. It was like a miracle. They would see that it was almost like Hashem would stand with the watering can and water the fields himself. Hashem's presence was very, very visible. And even now, when you go to Eretz Yisrael, when you go to the land of Israel, you feel Hashem's presence just much more revealed than any other place in the world. It seems like a place of miracles all the time. You just really feel a palpable presence. So when they came to Egypt, then they still kept that remembrance alive. So this is what Moshe Rabbeinu had to do. He had to take these Jews who grew up with only a knowledge of Egypt, and he had to bring out that inner emunah that they had, and he had to nourish it so that they would turn from believing only in themselves and their own efforts into believing that no, you don't just serve your own needs, you serve the needs of Hashem. And you make this world a dwelling place for Hashem by doing Torah and mitzvahs. And that's the most important thing. And this is what Moshe Rabbeinu did. This is how he redeemed the people, not only the physical, taking them out of Egypt, but taking them out of the Egypt mentality and turning them into servants of Hashem, turning them to a sheep in Hashem's flock who had a beautiful emunah that if they turn their eyes to heaven, then everything will work out fine, because that's the purpose of us being in this world. So the lesson for us in our daily lives, says the Rebbe, is that You know, a Jew has to live with this emunah every day. So how do we do that? Every morning when we wake up, the first thing we're supposed to do is pray, daven. After we daven, the next thing is to learn some Torah. And after we've done that, now we're ready to go and do our daily activities in the world. So when we're davening, we're like the forefathers living in Eretz Yisrael. We're connecting one-on-one with Hashem. And we're getting a clear view of Hashem as being in charge. And He's the one who's blessing. We're putting ourselves in that mindset that that's what's important in life. Then we go and we do Torah study. Now, when we do Torah study, on the one hand, we are coming down a notch because now we're trying to understand the Torah. During davening, we're not really trying to understand, we're trying to connect. In Torah study, we're trying to connect, but we're also trying to understand. And that means we're going to be limited to our own understanding. So we come down a notch. We're now limited by our understanding. So now we're at the level of the forefathers who came down to Egypt. Okay, so there's some limitations, the Mitzrayim, the Meitzarim, the limitations. But we're learning what it is that Hashem wants us to do in this world. So once we learn what Hashem wants us to do in this world by learning Torah, then we're ready to go out and do our activities of living, our business activities and all our other just worldly activities, because now we're going to do them according to the Shulchan Aruch, according to the Torah. So if we're tempted during our day to do something just for our own benefit, but it would go against the Torah, we'll stop ourselves and we'll say, no. If that's not what Hashem wants me to do, then there's no benefit to me to do it. I have to do things according to the Torah. That's the real benefit. The benefit comes from doing things that Hashem wants us to do, and then the blessings will come. Now, whether I'll be blessed with the abundant material benefits, or I'll be successful in my learning, or whatever else I'm trying to be blessed with, that comes from Hashem. I have to do my part. I have to do it according to what Hashem wants, but Hashem will then give the blessing. And you know what? Hashem's blessings are much greater and can achieve more than I could achieve by myself through my own efforts, my own limited efforts. So as long as I keep focused on that and get out of that Egypt mentality, that constricting Mitzrayim mentality, where I think it's all about me. No, it's all about Hashem. And Hashem's blessings are what are important. So this is a lesson that we learn from Shemos, from Moshe Rabbeinu being the Raya Mehemna and redeeming us. So whenever we feel we need to nourish our faith so that we can go through this world, through this gullus, and keep focused, let's channel that spark of Moshe Rabbeinu that's within every single one of us to nourish that faith. Re'eh emunah. I'm going to be nourished through my emunah, through my faith. That's what's going to provide my nourishment so that I can carry out my life in the proper way. And through this, God willing, we will see once again Moshe Rabbeinu, our Raya Mehemna, our faithful shepherd, with Mashiach Tzidkenu immediately, mamash now. Have a great Shabbos.